es la inspiración que se le presenta al oyente que escucha para que pueda configurar un escenario propio. Es un género totalmente libre en su construcción.
Radio art is the invitation that we make to the receiver,
the radio listener.
Time to configure a space of their own.
Los ingredientes con los que vamos a trabajar son los elementos del lenguaje. Música, con efectos, con la voz, la palabra y con el silencio.
There is no rigid diagram or structure that allow us to design radio art. You're listening to the noise of the vessel.
Para una mejor escucha, recomendamos el uso de auriculares.
Good morning. Oh, great. Good morning. Hey. So what is it for you? Buenas noches? Almost. Oh, yeah, on our way to the evening. Buenos tardes, then. Just say something. Something? Okay, here we are. All right, so Franco, Gerardo, hello. I think it is lovely to work together as partners with a creative project like this. That you challenge each other and you encourage and support each other and put in different perspectives. So it makes for a much richer process. And I imagine, Franco, after all this time of working solo, that you certainly notice the difference in having a colleague. Lovely. Well, look, I also want to thank you for speaking in my language and apologize that my Latin American Spanish is almost non-existent. Sarah and I, and my partner Sarah and I actually did study for about a year and a half Latin American Spanish, and we were never good at it at the time, and most of it has vanished, so I appreciate it.
It's okay. We recommend you come in sometime in the future. If you come to Chile or Argentina, you'll try and test your abilities, and after a couple of months, you'll be able to understand everyone in the continent.
Oh, yes, that is the way it works, isn't it?
That's right.
But in Australia, I mean, we are such a monolinguistic country. It's not like Europe where you have, all these different languages floating around. In Australia, it is English. Well, a bad form of English. and that's all we have. So what would you like to talk about this morning? And actually, before we proceed, would you mind if I just went and got a glass of water and then I won't dry up on you? Half a minute, please.
Sure, of course, please.
My name is Andrew Skeoch. I live in Southeast Australia, and my home is in bushland area, rural area. So we have native bushland birds and animals around our home. And I'm a wildlife sound recordist, so it's very appropriate. I've been a sound recordist for over 30 years now, and in that field of sound recording, I tend to specialize in soundscapes, so recording the whole ecosystem at one time. And I have a recording label called Listening Earth, which we established over these decades and published recordings now from around the world, from most continents, with one exception, and that is South America. We haven't been there yet. Yes.
Okay, thank you very much. When you decide start to work or start to research in this particular sound area, because you are a field recorder.
Yes, you're right, Franco. It does take a different kind of listening. And when I first began, I realized that I actually wasn't a very good listener. I had, and on multiple levels, so just to very sketchy and a bit of backstory for myself personally. I grew up in Sydney. It's one of the larger cities in the Southern Hemisphere. Unfortunately, at that time, there was quite a lot of bushland, sort of weaving its way through little streams and gullies amongst the suburbs in Sydney, and I just really loved the bush. I loved the birds. I learned all my birds. And so as a teenager, while everyone else was sort of out on the playing field for football and cricket, I was watching birds and drawing them. I became a reasonable ornithological artist as in my young years. And then I spent a lot of time traveling and came back to Australia eventually in my late 20s, and I had no idea of what I was going to do with my life. I really felt at a loss. And my first thing was to go into the bush and just spend some time reacquainting myself with the bush that I felt so familiar with and comfortable with. And I thought, well, the only two things in life that I really love are nature, and I'd also developed a great interest in and passion for music. However, I wasn't actually a very good musician. I wish I was, but it just wasn't one of the things that I was blessed with. However, I did think, well, look, I'd like to pursue that, and, I thought of the two, music was more likely to give me a pathway forward. And so by that time I had met my partner, Sarah, and we established a recording label with the idea of recording music that was informed by a relationship with nature in some way. And one of the early projects that we did was to record some music in the outdoors. And I thought, well, let's go to somewhere really special to do that. And we had heard of a national park in Western New South Wales. It's on the edge of the outback, so it's very much a dry area, but it has permanent water in gorges and watercourses. So I thought, well, look, I had some outdoor microphones and a field recorder, and we went there with the thought of just recording some birdie noises, whatever was there. And when we got there and I started recording, and there was one morning in particular where I got up in the pre-dawn and climbed onto a ridge, and in the darkness I heard these birds singing that were just so beautiful. It really was music to my ears, and I hadn't expected this. I didn't know what the species was, but it was just, they were all up and down this ridge in the far distance and one or two closer, and each bird was singing this sort of descending series of whistles. It was sort of, if I can try imitating it, it was like a, and if you can imagine, half a dozen or more birds doing this, it's like little waterfalls of sound. It was so beautiful. And I thought, well, if I haven't ever heard this before, there are probably a lot of other Australians that won't have heard this. And so at that time, although it took us a little while for the decision to be made, but I think at that moment I realized that what I really love to do is to record the natural environment and let people hear it. Once we've made that decision, that's what we have to spend our life doing.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, so impressive.
In this context, so this is your life now, and in the sonic matter, what are your sonic searches? Among the birds or these kind of environment, there are something that you think that it's more than birds or beyond the birds that are you interesting to do in research?
Yes, absolutely, Franco. And so let me go back to this thing of listening a little bit first, and then I will move into answering your question. So when I first began recording, I was thinking in terms of, there's something is interesting, that's a nice sound, I'll record that. And there's something else interesting, I will record that. And when I look back on those recordings now, there were no recordings of longer than about 15, maybe 20 minutes. And most of the time they were much shorter, 5 minutes, 4 minutes. So I was collecting little short grabs of sound. And in my mind I was thinking, well, that's beautiful, that's interesting. I was just hearing the kind of aesthetic sonics of the world around me. And I was collecting them a little bit like postcards, like little snapshots, little photographs. And my thought was that when I come to editing these together into a final CD-length program, that I would take the interesting ones and I would make them, I would put them all together, like a series of postcards, like a picture book, except in sound. And I realized that many, many years later, that nature doesn't turn on and off. Nature is just continuously, there is this sound. Even when it goes silent, there is still a presence of sound, this acoustic space in the environment. It was actually my listening that was fragmentary. I was listening in little bits and pieces. I couldn't maintain my attention over a period of time. Not only that, but I wasn't picking up on the subtleties and nuance of sound, so that when something was happening, I'd just hear it and say, that's interesting, and I'd record that. But I wouldn't be interested in how it was changing subtly, or the little things that were going on in amongst the sound, little hesitations, or slight changes of timbre and sound color, or changes in intensity or movement in the landscape. I wasn't picking up on a lot of these things. And finally, I was hearing one or two things in the soundscape. I wasn't hearing the whole environment as one integrated sound world. So it took me many years to develop that listening skill of hearing nature in the way that it presents itself. I was still thinking in terms of a kind of human way of listening to conversation, listening to music, sort of pulling it apart and finding interesting things, rather than actually just accepting the whole of nature's sound world as it presented itself to me. You know, as a sound recordist, you can't go out there with a shopping list of, I want to record this and this and this and this. You have to allow it to come to you and simply be grateful for what you hear. And a lot of it is very serendipitous. You've got no idea, like those birds on the ridgetop on that cold morning, that I didn't know that I was going to record that. It was a gift of nature. And so my listening has changed over the years, and my recording technique has changed from being collecting little bits and pieces to being now leaving the microphones to record for many hours. And I don't like editing up long recordings anymore. I let the microphones run, and even when things go quiet for 15 or 20 minutes, I'll leave that in the recording because that is a part of the natural flow. It's an important part. So, to come to your actual question, my research focus and what is engaging me, it is that nature, the acoustic space in nature is a space of communication. And each individual species enters that space and uses it in its own particular way. And that way has evolved over vast periods of time. So you're hearing these narratives, these stories that inform the life of each species. And whilst you've got many voices in the landscape, animals and birds and insects and frogs and so on, what really fascinates me is that all around the world, wherever you go, there are underlying principles that inform how the soundscape functions. And those underlying principles tell us how nature actually works and has evolved to work over these vast periods of time. And that is really my fascination. It's a little bit like listening to music, and you hear all the notes and you hear the melodies and you hear the rhythms, but after a while you get into the head of the musician and you think, this is what they are hearing, this is what they're thinking, this is what they're expressing. So for me, listening to nature is hearing the process of life and how life actually functions on our planet. And of course, that has relevance to how we as animals live on our planet. And so my research focus now is to think about how nature has sustained itself over millions, hundreds of millions of years. And as we are confronted by the crisis of our own time, of how we create a sustainable culture and a sustainable technology and a sustainable life on this planet, what does nature have to tell us about how to do that? And I think sound tells us nature's talking to us. I don't want to make too sort of, but it really is. I mean, you can listen to nature and you can hear how it's functioning. So there's a lot to be learned there.
Thank you. Thank you very, very much.
That's awesome.
Well, it's funny, Franco. I mean, for many, many years, I'm out there recording and I'm thinking, why am I doing this? Because I'm enjoying it. I'm having a wonderful time. I'm getting to travel around the world and experience some amazing places and meet some wonderful people in the process. And my excuse has always been, well, I'm going to publish these recordings. So that's the reason I'm doing it. That validates my life and what I've chosen to do. And in recent years, as we all know, music has gone online, it's on streaming platforms, and the income stream is not what it used to be when we were selling CDs or even digital downloads directly to people. And so the question has been, well, why am I continuing to do this? There isn't the commercial justification anymore. And so I've really had to think about this question of what am I doing and why am I doing it and what's the point of listening to nature? And these are the answers that I'm eventually coming to, is that it's not just a personal entertainment here. This is actually fundamentally important that we as a human species and as the various cultures that we divide ourselves into, fundamentally important that we actually start listening to the natural world around us and to find a communion in that listening. Okay, all right. I will see you again shortly. Thank you both. Gracias.
El ruido es el mensaje. Il rumore, qual era la, non mi ricordo più?
Il rumore è il messaggio.
Il rumore è il messaggio.
Il rumore è il messaggio.
So in this sense, you're a very unusual kind of producer in terms that your work is mostly to capture in sound recording form what's happening around you. The first question that comes to my mind is in terms of this sort of affective approach, in the sense of not interfering with what's going on and not trying to direct it or not trying to conduct it or not trying to turn it into something else, which is a very, very difficult position standpoint when you record things. And from then on, I wonder about your, I presume, huge archive. Just looking at your website, it's very, very huge and very varied, despite the concentration in Brazil, because the only South America recordings presented in the website are from Brazil, which is a huge landscape in itself. So I was wondering also about how this process has evolved in technical terms, mostly from the equipment you're using. What's your position on the archive? So I'd like you to play with all this, the things that I've mentioned.
Thank you, Gerardo. I will start with talking about the field skills, field techniques. When I first began, I had the loan of a pair of long super cardioid shotgun microphones. So I had stereo, but I soon realized that they didn't create a stereo picture. It was like having two telephoto lenses. And you get some lovely recordings of individual creatures vocalizing, but it's very difficult to get that integrity of the sound through that. So within a short space of time, I had purchased a pair of short hypercardioid microphones. I think they were MKH 60s. And throughout this time, I'm hand-holding these microphones in pistol grips so that I'm wandering around the bush and I'm opportunistically listening for good sounds and then trying to make a recording of it. And gradually my recordings got longer so that I would be recording 10 minutes, 20 minutes, sometimes half an hour, but there is a limit to how much you can stand quietly hand-holding microphones. Nevertheless, I found that the technique worked reasonably well. It gave me some lovely feature recordings. But I still found that I'd be listening for things. I'd be turning the microphones on when things were already in progress. And then I'd be waiting until I felt they stopped before I turned the microphones off. And so I'd get all these recordings that started in the middle of something and gradually dissipated and finished. And so eventually I realized now what I need to do is put the microphones on a tripod and basically just leave them there and walk out of the picture, leave animals and birds and so on to do what they do without trying to work with the sound at the same time. So my original idea of hand-holding microphones came from an Australian composer, classical composer, David Lumsdaine, who talked about this composing in the field where you point the microphones where the interest is and you're kind of creating the recording in the moment that you're hearing it. But I eventually realized that had its limitations. It did create some wonderful recordings where you can, like, for instance, you have a flock of birds in the trees, and so you can point the microphones at that flock and you can get some groups of the birds in left channel and other groups of the birds in the right channel, and you can hear them backwards and forwards talking to each other. And you get these lovely stereo recordings like this. But in the end, I decided, no, put the microphones on a tripod and simply leave them there to have their own adventure and don't interfere, and then see what you get. Sometimes you put them in the wrong spot and you really don't get very much, or it's just not a very active morning for one reason or another. By doing this kind of approach, you first of all have to take yourself out of the picture. But the main creative role that I do have is thinking about where I'm going to put those microphones. And so you have to be looking for what my colleagues sometimes call the sweet spot in the landscape. This is where the activity is going to be concentrated. And so you're going to get movement and different sounds coming and going and make an interesting recording. And in some cases, that's very easy to identify. Something like a wetland, you can put your microphones on the edge of the wetland and you know that there are going to be birds coming through the reeds, and there will be water birds out on the water, and they'll be flying in and landing on the water and taking off again. And you know that there's going to be movement and dynamics and variety and interest, and you're capturing the whole environment. But in other places, it's really difficult to work out where that sweet spot might be, because a habitat might be quite uniform. You might be in a rainforest and you're walking around and it's all the same. So where's things going to be happening? And sometimes you might be able to find something like a fruiting tree that a lot of birds come into, but then again, all you get is a whole lot of birds coming into a fruiting tree. So you've kind of got to read the landscape and understand something about the creatures that live in that environment and how they vocalize and when they vocalize and where to put the mics to capture an interesting aesthetic as well as biologically interesting recording. So there's a lot of sort of natural history involved in natural history knowledge about the species and their behaviors and how the ecosystem functions involved in making those kind of decisions. It's very hit and miss in the sense that I can't say that I know. You just try and see. So that has really become my way of capturing recordings, and sometimes you get a good one and sometimes it's this decision of what is a good recording is very much an aesthetic thing for me. It's about dynamics and movement and diversity and variety. More recently, I've gone back to hand-holding microphones again, and that is because I find myself now more in pursuing an educational path, having recently written a book, and so I'm more interested in recording examples of behavior or interesting dynamics in the natural environment. And it's far easier to simply have your microphones in your hand and go, there it is, right, turn on, let's get a recording of this particular thing. So yeah, different techniques for different approaches, but all of it really needs to be based in an understanding of what I'm actually recording. I don't know, does that answer the question, or have I missed a part of it?
Yeah, absolutely. New avenues for thought and new potential questions. So it's great that you mentioned this. It's a sort of dimension that you don't inhabit the way you used to do it in these areas, in city areas or in places related to human interactions modulated by the city patterns and parameters. I was thinking more about this Miguel Ruiz concept about the dream of the planet versus the dreams you have yourself. He says that in this book, with 4 agreements, the Toltec civilization understood the mind's function as dreaming. So we dream awake and asleep. So in the sense we're dreaming asleep, our contents become freer, and when we're awake, we're dreaming the planet's dream, in which there are agreements of things, and we understood time, for example, and usage of time at having certain qualities, having certain rhythm. So the mind adapts the individual dream to that collective one. So in this sense,
Gerardo, let me just respond to a few of those thoughts. And I'm just going back to what you began to speak about, which has kind of slipped my mind. So you're talking about the sort of socio-economic aspects of doing this, and for me personally, I've always felt a little bit on the edge of the human world. I have this picture of myself as a teenager, and when I would be put on the cricket team, I was so useless at at actually playing the game, that I would always be the one that was on the outfield. I'd be way out there, and I'd be watching the swallows flying across the grass and plovers foraging, and hearing the birds in the trees beyond every now and again I'd hear my name yelled by the people playing the cricket, and I'd see the ball flying over my head. That was me. I was very much disengaged from the kind of, as much as I had to do my schooling and I had my friends and so on, but a part of my mind, and to use your terminology, Gerardo, I was dreaming in the nature space. And it was always my place of solace, my place where I could just come back to myself and sit quietly and watch the birds and feel that special moment when something came close to you, or you would see a species that you'd never seen before, or something catch your eye that attracted your curiosity. And so I guess I have lived much of my life and my working life in that kind of childhood space of just a delight in nature, and I've been so fortunate to be able to pursue that. I feel extraordinarily privileged and lucky to be able to do it, and because of that I have equally felt a responsibility that if I'm going to do this, I want to give back. Which brings me to the human world, our modern industrial consumer society. And how do I do that? And of course the mechanism I have found is by packaging these sound recordings nicely, nice words and nice images and a nice recording, and offering it for sale. And look, that is probably the obvious mechanism. And it's one that people very much appreciate, because they can take the recording and they can put it into their lives. They can go to sleep to it, they can meditate to it, they can get creative in their studio or something, do their art or whatever to it, or however people use our recordings. And we've never particularly gone down the road of trying to make them, this is relaxation or this is new age or something like that. I've always attempted to maintain a sense, no, you're listening to a living environment. This is animate sound. This is the sound of the real world that we are surrounded by. And I'm simply offering it for people that maybe don't have that opportunity to hear it for one reason or another. Probably one of the bigger ones is people that don't have the mobility to go out into the bush. Older people particularly. Sometimes people that are living in big cities. I remember one customer getting in touch with us and saying, look, I live in the middle of Beijing, but I come from Australia and it's just so lovely to hear my native birdsong again. And so I think we, as individuals, we all have a relationship with nature. And my role has been to offer people a small, technologically mediated, admittedly, a little reminder of nature, a little experience. And sound, of course, is just so evocative. It brings back memories. It allows you to do that dreaming that you're talking about, Gerardo, that you can put on the headphones, and if I have recorded it well, you will feel the sound all around you, almost in 3 dimensions, from a binaural recording, which is primarily how I record now. So this has been the experience of sound that I have had, and it's what I can offer my fellow humans is, well, listen to what I have been privileged to hear. And also be reminded that this is really precious. Not only the listening space for yourself to restore your own sense of calm and belonging and a sense of place and identity in the world in relationship with nature, but also be reminded these birds and animals, they exist in the real world, and their existence is not necessarily guaranteed. And many of them are under threat. The ecosystems are under threat. And so there is a conservation and nature awareness narrative that goes into our work, and to carry that requires integrity and authenticity and some degree of authority about what you're recording and how you're presenting that recording to the world. So that's just some of my thoughts on our interaction with the modern world and how we've negotiated, the realities of a consumer society. I don't necessarily say it's the best way of doing things, but it's just how we've come to do it over the years.
It's fantastic, and it's so generous from your side, dealing with this concept of taking something from this sort of big reservoir of human surroundings, let's say, because that's always associated with culture, and culture understood as something human. But then you realize that, and you have presented it very, very clearly, that the basis for this reservoir is this natural environment.
Yes, exactly, Harald.
So this natural environment is also part of that reservoir and should be shared and should be cherished and should be taken care of. So in this sense, it's wonderful how you have that told us your train of thought in that area. And I would say your train of feeling mostly. It's not something you think, it's something you feel, and then you start realizing in conscious terms what you're dealing with.
And I think that feeling is so important. When many of my colleagues are scientists, or they are fellow recordists that are embedded in the sciences in some way. And I'm very aware of how the sciences have become disconnected from nature. Even when scientists have a focus on bioacoustics or ecoacoustics or something, there is always this objectivity. And that objectivity is in itself a disconnection. They are disconnecting themselves from the dream, to put it into your words. And it seems to me our society has become so disconnected. It's not that we as individuals have, because I think we as individuals feel that connection with nature. But our society as a kind of an organism, as a structure, as a process, has become disconnected. We are locked into this consumer, capitalist and governance systems where even though we want to make decisions differently, we simply cannot, because of the priorities of profit and of power. And that to me is the tragedy of our species, and indeed the tragedy of our planet. And so for me, I'm only one person, but I know that nature is way bigger than our species. Nature is this vast, mysterious thing of which we are a part, a process of which we are a part. I think the human species has this hubris that we think that we manage the natural environment and we control ourselves and we're in charge of it. No. And I think, the COVID pandemic was a perfect example of this, that this tiny little virus can come along and just shut down everything. So I'm very aware that no matter what we dream within our own species, what our human dreamings are, and of course every culture represents a variation on that dreaming, but the underlying themes are we're in charge. Look, we've created our civilization, we can make decisions. And I'm sitting there and I'm feeling as though, no, everything that we have created comes from the gifts of nature, from our intelligence, from the energy sources that we've managed to harvest, from the sunlight that grows our food, from the climate gives us a stable living space. So to me, nature holds all the cards. Nature is in charge, always has been. It's a mysterious process. I don't understand what is the purpose of life and our presence here, but I know that it's absolutely fundamentally important, and I know that our anthropocentric world has lost that connection. We've lost our communion. It is there in indigenous cultures and traditional cultures and knowing, but in our modern world we've kind of forgotten that, or we've thought, oh, we've grown beyond that. We haven't. I think a part of what I feel as I'm here to do, my purpose, is to just gently remind people of nature in all its beauty and diversity and sonic interest, and also that nature is important. It's important in our personal lives, but it's also important. It's absolutely fundamental to our human place. And so we have to find a new purpose that is not just self-serving, that it's not about our own consumerism or our own power or our own wealth or status. Our human purpose has to be looking after each other and looking after the planet. that is something that our present systems of governance and economics don't support that purpose. And so to find that purpose for all of us involves thinking about the kind of systemic processes that we live under and the nature of those. What are the value foundations that underlie them? Things like cooperation, competition. And that opens up a whole vast subject of philosophy. But it's all embedded in our relationship with nature, or reflective of.
Thank you.
Where you know.
Well, I'm sure you have your thoughts on this too, that this isn't, I know I'm not the only one thinking about this. And what I find often with people in this space of thinking about, well, how can the world be different? What they're doing without maybe acknowledging it is that they're thinking about how to create a sustainable future. And that is that's what nature's been doing for, however many billion years. We're just learning to do the same thing in our own way. So I find a lot of synchronicity between myself and the thinking of economic and social thinkers.
What do you consider to be the importance of noise and silence in your work?
Okay. So I suppose that the issue is how do you define noise? And for me, I don't know that it's a word that I've really thought about an awful lot, so I'll default to Murray Schafer's definition of noise being low information sound. And I find in a lot of urban environments that it's full of low information sound, vehicle noise, aircraft traffic, just stuff that doesn't really tell you much of interest, whereas in a natural soundscape it is full of high information sound, the highest levels of information. How does life work? What are the processes? How does this all fit together? What is my relationship? These are the most important things that we can consider and learn from listening. So to me, I think of noise as just being either low information sound or else masking static information, a sort of level of sound that masks the high information stuff behind it. And nature actually contains that. I mean, the sound of wind in the trees or water or surf on a beach is a masking sound on the biological sound. But it nevertheless contains a level of information that's slightly higher than, just hearing a freeway in the background, for instance. So for me, I'm thinking of the sound world, both human and nature, as being rich in information or deficit of information. And as I think of how we can move forward in our civilization, in our culture, in our place in the world, the role of sound becomes a metric, a measure of where we can move to. And my way of thinking about it is that if we can get the sound right, in other words, if we can increase the level of information in the sound world around us, that automatically moves us in the right direction. So for instance, an internal combustion engine is very inefficient. It produces a lot of noise. And the more inefficient it is, the more noise it produces. So a diesel engine will produce more noise than a petrol engine, for instance. But an electric engine is very efficient. It produces very little noise. And lo and behold, a diesel engine produces far more pollution and atmospheric changing implications than an electric engine does. So you get the sound right and other things start falling into place. So yeah, I'm just thinking in terms of however you define noise, thinking about it in terms of information, relevant, life-enhancing information, and bringing it, not that it's only left to nature, but that we bring that level of information into our urban spaces and into our daily living as well. And if we do that, then we're bringing nature into our living spaces and thinking about how to green our cities and so on. I'm not being very articulate here, but I think you understand what I'm trying to get at.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
No, it's okay. It's great. Yeah, it's very, very clear in terms of the elements that constitute an approach and a view of phenomena. So it's okay.
Isn't that the wonderful thing about us humans, that we all, I love this idea of your dreaming, that we all dream slightly different things.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a book by a Mexican author, I guess. It's called Miguel Ruiz, and he deals with some ancient Toltec wisdom conceptions, and the one of the dream, the permanent dream, is one of those. And it's wonderful because it helps to understand also this relationship with nature in a different way, not so detached, not so separated, and recognizing that that's also a link among us as human species and the other species around the planet.
Would you like to render the recording and come back online again in another few minutes?
I'm enjoying this conversation, by the way. I hope I'm not talking too much, that there are more.
Yes, of course, of course.
All right, lovely. Thank you both.
All right.
El ruido
es el mensaje.
Vamos por más, dice la rana, escúchame, ¿eh? Esto recién empieza.